Thank you for tuning into the Radicards podcast on radicards.com. I'm your host, Patrick Greeno, and today we're going to be talking about some strategy points and, well, some auctions and things. So let's get right into it here. Ryan, thanks for joining me again today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk about eBay for a minute. As a lot of you might know, I do a lot of eBay research as part of like incorporation for a blog, and these podcasts and things. So, of course, buying things for my own collections or whatever. And, sometimes I'll also sell, and I'll sell large collections. And, there's a strategy for selling on eBay that allows, it depends on how you sell on eBay. So here's the thing, is that if you have, let's say, a large collection of one player that you got from somebody who collected that player for a long time, and you've got 6 to 8 months to list it all and sell it. This happened to me in 2010. I had 8 months. I sold a really big Jose Canseco collection. Really nice pieces, anything from 98 Diners Crusade Red to like early game used jersey autos to like a brick of base and really high end memorabilia pieces like signed gloves and bats and just a ton of stuff. So I was listing like hundreds of items. I think I was doing 100 a day, 80 to 100 auctions a day for months. So at any given time, I had hundreds of auctions listed and ending. And so I was busy. I was taking piles of stuff to the post office all the time. What I realized is that when I flooded the market like that, it's hard for buyers because those are big financial commitments, and they come at a surprise. People don't plan for that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So when that happens, unless I have, $3,000 just sitting just for this particular thing, this instance, then I'm sort of out of luck on a lot of that stuff. And if I'm flooding the market with tons of high end all at the same time, like say hundreds of autos and hundreds of rare 90s inserts and, countless base and really nice, all the stuff I listed, when I flood the market, let's say I have, at one point, I think in that Canseco collection, I had something like 15 of the same buyback auto. And they were numbered to like, I think 150 to 200, whatever it was. They were hand numbered. You know the ones I'm talking about, Ryan, from 2001 SP. That 2000 SP stuff. So the first one sold really well. Like, I got like $60 for it. But as I kept listing them, obviously the prices will go down because the market will correct, knowing that there's so many coming through the pipeline. And so I think the last one I sold was like $20-some.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, because I was listing a bunch of them at one time, or 5 at once and then another 5 at once and another 5, whatever. I can't remember now. It's been so long. It's 9 years ago now. But when I did that, I realized that values per item start to go down a little bit. Granted, the best way to do that is do it every other Friday. No, because you benchmark it off of people's paycheck intervals. That way, they can plan to have enough money set aside to bid on some of these nice things. Now, to what degree of how many items you want to list at one time, well, it's kind of hard to measure that, right? There's no way to do that. But you can say, well, I've got 3,000 items. Let's list 200 of them this week, and over the course of several months, we'll blow them all out. We'll sell them all. So if I flood the market, I destabilize market like the value of things. But if I drip them out over time, and, kind of look at things like, okay, people get paychecks every 2 weeks. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll list blocks of this stuff every 2 weeks for a long time. And then people can, I might get higher bids on things knowing that people aren't like hurting their bank account every time. So this is the kind of like auction strategy between flooding and dripping into the auction. Like the flood method is put everything up there as quickly as possible and just sell it all at once. It's just hard on buyers. I've been in that situation as a buyer. It's really hard on my wallet. It's just tough. I can't predict when those things are going to happen. So I try to set aside some money just in case that happens. Happened recently. I didn't buy any, I think I bought like 3 or 4 cards of this giant collection that was listed. Most of it I already had, but the stuff I didn't have just, several grand to just blow out of the gate. But if he listed that collection a little bit at a time over the course of several months, I probably would have been able to finance 1 or 2 of the key pieces I needed in that collection that I didn't buy when he listed it, because he listed, this so many hundreds of cards all at once. So, Ryan, have you come across this before?
Yeah, and we were just looking at Keith Van Horn listings.
Oh yeah.
obviously Keith Van Horn is less popular than um, a
Jordan.
Frank Thomas or a Jose Canseco
Right.
kind of player. But it really kind of is. I think it's a lose-lose situation for the buyer and the seller when everything is kind of thrown up there at once. And if you're the seller, unless you're an official eBay store, you're going to get hit pretty hard with fees and shipping all at once. And I think a lot of people don't quite take into account how significant that cost can be once you start selling 10, 20, 30 items at once. And everything is ending around the same time and then being shipped at the same time. So that's another kind of check in the drip column, is that you can space out your shipping and service fees a little bit. But yeah, I've experienced this with some players I collect. All of a sudden, like just a bunch of things will drop on the market, and the prices get kind of wacky, and it's kind of hard to predict. And it's unfortunate when that happens. And I understand that some sellers are they just want to get rid of stuff. They just have inventory they're trying to get rid of.
Right.
Totally get it. But if you have the patience and you have the timetable flexibility, I would definitely recommend spacing it out a little more.
So with the fees thing, look, that's just part of, it's like driving a car. The fees associated with driving, it's like gas, time, maintenance, and repairs, right? So with the fees, that's just part of selling. Granted, if you're selling anything, they're not going to charge you 100%. So the fees are kind of just absorbed by the sale.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a high volume seller, to get around some of the fees is you get a store going. You wouldn't just list without a store. See, what you could do with the store thing, this is another piece of it, is that a store fee I think right now is $75 a month without looking at it. Okay, let's just use that figure for this. This is $75 a month to run an eBay store. Change from a generic eBay dashboard to an eBay store dashboard. $75 a month. It makes sense to move to a store when your sales exceed $75 a month. It doesn't make sense to move to a store until you've exceeded that monthly threshold, because then you're losing money. If your monthly bills for eBay sales are $40-$50 and you own a store, then you're wasting $25, or the difference between your monthly bill and the monthly bill associated with having a store. This is kind of where I am with these things. Like, I understand, like, okay, when do I migrate to a store? At what point does it make sense to do that? If I'm high volume enough, at some point it'll make total sense to move to a store. If I'm selling like tens of thousands of items a week, then a store option would be very, very desirable, because my cost savings would be definitely a plus. Huge in the black, like huge. But if I'm selling 2 or 3 pieces here, one there, a couple there, one there, over the space of a month, having a store option doesn't really make any sense, because I just don't have enough volume going to make it make sense financially from a fiscal standpoint. Does that make sense, Ryan?
Oh yeah, totally.
So the store option is really nice for that sort of thing. Now, if you're planning on selling a large collection, like a huge player collection like I did in 2010, having that store option would make sense, because if I'm selling thousands of pieces over the course of 8 months, tens of thousands of pieces, my bill, if I don't have a store, is going to be vastly exceed my monthly store bill. And that's when having a store would have made sense for me in 2010. I didn't move over to a store in 2010. But looking in hindsight now, which is always 2020, right? Is that the store option would have made sense to me then. So, but once you get done selling that one collection, and if it's a one-of opportunity, you can move it back down. What do they call that? Demote your status from store to the generic eBay dashboard. At least that's my understanding, as eBay allows you to kind of move back and forth. That's been my understanding of how that. I don't quote me on that, because I haven't needed to go back and forth. So that just might be something for the listener to do research. Just looking at this from a financial standpoint, how to make the most bang for your dollar when you're selling something on eBay. If you're selling a large volume, the store option is very desirable. If you're selling low volume, the general universal eBay dashboard makes more sense. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on the auction strategy for flooding the market. and what it does to the buyers and the sellers, as Ryan and I just talked about, and dripping them out over time, the drip strategy. While that may be more work for the seller, you might be able to maximize your profits in that strategy, which is beneficial. But time is of the essence, so sometimes the flood option is somewhat more desirable in that capacity. So I want to move on a little bit and talk about keyword value as it relates to eBay auction titles. Okay, so a lot of auctions out there titled pretty well, like 1986 Fleer Jordan, Michael Jordan. They might put 86 or 1986. It doesn't really matter. Fleer, Michael Jordan, rookie, or RC, or whatever. All the keywords associated with a card is spelled out. And if it's like you're selling a David Justice card, you might put the words David and Dave in the auction title to maximize reach of the keywords themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is important because if I type in David Justice, I won't be able to see Dave Justice auction titles. So it's important to really maximize that by adding in the nickname and the full name on this thing, but also all the other associations to the card. If it's like 1990 Upper Deck, if it's PSA graded PSA 8 or PSA 9 or whatever it is, just fully. You might put card number in there. All the things associated. Make sure it's in the right category. It's in sports memorabilia, trading cards, baseball cards. Make sure it's categorized correctly. You and I both, Ryan, have run into football cards in the baseball category.
Yep.
But those should really they don't. It doesn't make sense to have them in the baseball category. It makes much more sense to have them in the football category because that's where the buyers are if they're going to be attracted to that item. Obviously, that goes without saying, but it's really important to pay attention to these fine details.
Yeah, totally. And I don't know if our listeners aren't aware, but I believe it's fatfingers.com. It's a great resource for misspellings. So kind of related to keyword searches, but there's a lot of listings that have misspellings, especially guys with more complicated names or more complicated names of products. And Fat Fingers has a search algorithm that'll go through and find all possible misspellings of someone's name or a product. So just kind of related in how the listing and the keywords can really affect what you actually see when you search for something.
Well, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know about that website. Huh. Fascinating. Yeah, so when you're listing something on eBay, pay really close attention to these things because this is the kind of stuff that will help you drive a sale. Get you in touch with a buyer. There are people that are, facetious about this and they joke around about it. Ryan forwarded me a link to an auction tonight with a gentleman who appears to be selling some really high-end, well-known pieces with relatively decent keyword associations on the titles. And then he has one of a card that I don't think has any collectability whatsoever, and his title is this: "Coolest card ever!" exclamation mark. So that has to be a joke, right? But let's say it's not a joke. Let's say it's not a joke. The person looking for that card is not going to search that phrase.
Coolest card ever.
They're not going to search that phrase. Sorry. And so if you really want to be found, you have to think about how people are going to want to try to search for you, right? And I mean, a lot of ways, like marketers make themselves available online by spelling out their full names, making themselves like people are going to search for their full names, so they're going to spell their full names. Some of us put in our middle initial to make differentiate ourselves from the other John Andersons out there, right? So this is kind of one of those things where if you really want to be found, pay attention to how you're titling your auctions, and try not to. Okay, there's some unethical behavior that goes on in this, and we've discussed this in previous podcasts. If you stuff your titles with keywords that aren't associated with your card, in some ways that's considered black hat marketing because that's dishonesty, and people are going to run across your auction hoping for that item that's associated with that keyword that's not associated with the card being sold. And I don't want to see that in my search feed. I just don't want to see it. You know, it doesn't do me any good to see something that's not associated with what I searched for in my search feed.
Yeah, it's annoying, but it
But
happens.
people do it to put eyeballs on the products. Like they'll put RC next to something that's not a rookie card. You know, they'll put Superfractor next to something that's not a Superfractor. They'll put Mike Trout's in the title for a card that's not Mike Trout. This happens so frequently that it's almost a daily occurrence, right? So, I mean, how many times have I seen an auction for a 1990 Upper Deck box and it says Frank Thomas rookie card on it in the title? I'm like, dude, he's not in that. 1990 Don Russ, Frank Thomas rookie. He's not in that, man. Sorry. I'm not going to like go out of my way to PM the seller and tell him that, but you know, if you really want to build a reputation for yourself that's a good one, a strong one, and you want to make good connections with customers, be honest. You know, do the best you can to serve an audience based on where searches are placed, how searches are placed, what they're placed, like what's in the search.
Mm-hmm.
So, coolest card ever is unfortunately not something I would ever search for on eBay, right? But
Right.
if I'm searching for Ken Griffey Jr., I might do a negative search just for Griffey and see what comes up in a block of years that I know he played and not his father. And because I know people they're gonna make listings with titles that don't have Ken or Jr. in the listing. That is called negative search. If you say you search Griffey and then you space negative Jr. and then space negative Ken, you'll get a whole different batch of listings. All the stuff that just says Griffey in the title, but it might be stuff you're looking for. So it's good to kind of like well-round your searches in that way and think of think of titles and searches that'll accommodate titles that people might think of because they run out of characters. This happens in like when people are selling sets or like things that feature other cards that have of players that are collected as well, and it's not just Griffey, and so they only have enough space to put the word Griffey in a title. So in this way, the negative search helps resolve those listings and see kind of what you can find in addition to King Griffey Jr. stuff. So I want to talk about that. Ryan, you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think we really covered it. It's once you're on eBay for a while, you start to kind of like mentally filter this stuff out.
Yeah. Right.
But it is important, especially when you're a buyer. You want to make sure everything is, or sorry, when you're a seller, you want to make sure that your title is as specific and helpful as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it especially comes into play when you're searching for popular players, just because guys like Mike Trout, sellers will try and work in Mike Trout in any way possible just because he's so popular.
Right.
So just kind of got to watch out for it. But like I said, once you're on eBay for a while, you kind of realize that you sort of like start to mentally filter it out.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're like me, you're like, oh, that's cool. Like I filtered baseball highest first, and there's a Tom Brady card that introduces the list. I never would have searched for it, obviously, but kind of cool that I ran across it. Fine, but those are instances that are rare that I cherish. But those cards generally just sit there forever anyway. And then you find interesting, funny, sort of strange auctions, like a 78 Topps card graded in 8, and the guy wants $27,000 for it. Or and it's a common. So it's like funny stuff like that is resolved. You kind of get to find these sort of things. So anyway, I wanted to discuss that. Moving on here, let's talk about facts and how they always come before quality of reputation. Okay? So let me give an example. I was in a recent conversation online, I was talking about a Griffey card from 97 that was a rare parallel, but it didn't have the serial number on it. This particular example didn't have the serial number on it. Pack issued ones did to 30. This one didn't have the serial number on it. And some of the dialogue kind of turned into like people thinking it was trimmed or it was fake. And I was like, okay, do you have proof to back up those claims? Like, no, but I heard it in another group of people that are reputable. It's like, okay, did they have proof to back up the claims? Like, no, but they're reputable sources. It's like, well, unfortunately, I'm a reputable source, and I could just feed people lies all day long if I wanted to, but it's not fact. Like, what would be the point of me to share information that's not factual? This is kind of where I go with this. Just because you're well known doesn't mean you don't need to provide facts to back up your claims, right? Information and facts are king. Okay, so and just for the record, just because something doesn't have a serial number on it doesn't mean it's fake. It means actually, technically speaking, it's a replacement card that made its way into the market via a buyout or a bankruptcy or an employee backdoor, but they were legitimate printed cards most of the time, specifically in the 90s era. Okay, I mean, you see fakes tossed around like ACEO, essentially modern day Broder cards, all day long, and they're essentially just counterfeit cards. A lot of them. Some of them are custom that are illegal that shouldn't be made because they don't have licensing to do that. And then some are just blatant, outright counterfeits, and people call them reprints. They're not reprints. Ryan and I, we discussed this in a previous episode.
Yes.
But the stuff that doesn't have serial numbers on it from the 90s, the high-end inserts and whatever else, refractors and things, they're not fake. They're just replacement cards that made way into the market at some point. They're legitimate examples of the cards. They're actually just variations now because they were never used as replacements. If they were used as replacements, let's say I get a bent version of this card in a pack, it's like damaged, and I call the company. It's like, hey, I got this, 97 totally certified platinum gold Griffey, and it's got a crease on it. How can you help me? They're like, what's the serial number on it? It's like, oh, it's 27 out of 30. Okay, so they're going to take a replacement card from their inventory, the ones without the serial number on them. They'll hand number 27 out of 30, and then send it to that customer. This is why you see cards with hand numbering on them that where it should be printed on the card.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen it, Ryan. You've seen these, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you might even have some. I have plenty of them myself. But those are ones that were like actually went through the replacement process. The stuff that doesn't have the serial numbers on them, they just didn't have the opportunity to go through the process. But they're legitimate printed cards. They're not fakes. They're authentic, legitimate printed cards. If you give me factual information to back up the claim that it's trimmed, fine, I'll listen. But until you do that, I don't care who you are. I'm not going to buy it. I need factual. I don't care if you're, the richest man in the world and you're claiming that X, Y, and Z is happening. It's like, well, you can give me factual information. I might be able to sit down and absorb this content. Until then, it's just conjecture. Ryan, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I use a lot of, online communities, online forums. Twitter is definitely one of them to gather information about the hobby. And I've seen some false information or just something that's not entirely true being spread by someone that has, like 10,000 posts on a forum or, 10,000 Twitter followers or something.
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to, do your own research. If something is said that you find a little suspicious, because there is a lot of misinformation out there in the hobby, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And these online communities are great places to find out information, but you just have to be careful and make sure you're fact checking everything.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. The spread of misinformation is rampant in the hobby. Sadly, people still think the 52 Topps Mantle is the rookie card, sadly. And I've proven this I've debunked this claim in a blog post with firm, factual, backed up evidence of what it requires, for performance, longevity, to get rookie status in baseball, when stuff is released in the hobby, dates. I mean, I broke it down. Like, really, when people say that's a 52 Topps Mantle is a rookie, I'm like, sorry, it's not. Here's why. And I provide factual information to validate that debunk that claim that it's a rookie. I'm like, no, the 51 Bowman is the only one and forever will be the only Mickey Mantle rookie card. Recently, I came across an auction that I guess had sort of like ran its course in the hobby. I wasn't aware. This is the first time I came across it. In football, there's a football card where the card was printed with a dirty razor blade underneath the laminate, which is the card gloss in the front of the card, underneath, like in the card. Razor blade, dirty one. I mean, this is like, if you in 99 or whenever this card came out, I think it was 99 now. I blogged about it. You can go to Radicards.com. You can search for this thing. Kids were still buying packs. At least I think they were in 99. card shows are still
Oh
having
yeah.
in ballrooms. Like kids were buying stuff. If my kid bought a pack of cards and pulled this thing, I might
Oof.
take the company to court. Like, dude, I don't want my kid exposed to dirty razor blade. You know?
Yeah, this is ridiculous. So I assume what happened is whoever was cutting the sheets put their razor on the.
No, I don't think that sheets are cut by human razors, man. I think those are cut by machines.
So did a razor fall out of a machine and before it got sent to the laminate
Here's what I think happened.
process?
Here's what I
Okay.
think happened just off the top of my head. People in manufacturing use razors to open boxes of product because product is never shipped raw. It's shipped protected in a box. So razor blades or, what razor cutters or whatever, you have one available, you cut it open, you pull the product out, you put it through the printing process or whatever. And somebody just didn't put the razor blade in their pocket, as secure enough, and it fell out during one of the steps in the chain of operation steps. This would be my assumption. I can't back this up with any degree of certainty whatsoever, but I'm trying to think of a situation in which there would be any instance where this would take place, and this is the only thing I can come up with without thinking more in depth about this particular scenario. It's probably a one of one. I can't imagine there's another card with a razor blade stuck on the laminate. It's probably a one of one.
I guess I'm actually surprised I think the seller's showing some constraint here because although they have it listed for an absorbent price, I would expect some crazy title like eBay one of one or super rare or something, but it just says razor blade card.
Coolest
it's a
card
normal
ever.
thing.
Coolest card ever.
Yeah, the coolest razor blade card ever. And it's Darnay Scott, who I had never ever heard of. So that just adds to the value right there. Yeah, very kind of creepy and weird. And
if you pulled this, Ryan, what would you do? I mean, how would you take any action? How'd you respond to this?
I would certainly try and take some action. I don't know about legal action, but I think at the very least, if you contacted the company and just express your dissatisfaction, you should be able to get some compensation out of it, some free product or
a free bag of circus animal cookies.
Yeah, something. Maybe some more factory pieces from their factory. I don't really know.
We're sorry we sent you this dirty razor blade in the card. How about a half-eaten bag of circus animal cookies I got on my desk here, like in a drawer?
Yeah,
Here, I tell you
stuff.
what. Well, send us the card back, and we'll send you one with a clean razor blade in it.
That's true. But really, what would you rather have? A normal, clean 1999 Upper Deck Darnay Scott or this razor blade one?
Honestly,
Which
I just
one's
keep
more
the card.
interesting?
I'd keep the card because I don't even look. Here's the thing: with 99 Upper Deck, anything printed is printed in quantity base. We're talking about
huge.
So who cares? Who cares who it was? I don't really care. I'd want to keep the card because of its uniqueness. Probably. I talk about the legal side, but really, I probably wouldn't take any action. I'd just be like, yeah, that's interesting. Let's make sure I don't touch it. Let's get it sleeved and top loaded ASAP and be done with it. But it's mostly just a talking point, really.
Yeah, I'd love to know the history of this card, who pulled it, and how many times it's changed hands. And
you might email the seller and ask him and see if that's the original owner. Might be. I don't know. Speaking of things that are stuck to cards, I recently acquired a 1990 Topps Frank Thomas with the gum still stuck on the back. Now, I have some gum-stained versions of that card, one or two at least. So the gum was, peeled off. You could see like the dark colored spot where it used to be. Well, this one I bought still has the gum adhered to the card, which I think is pretty cool because, they printed the heck out of 90 Topps. So probably there are other examples floating around with the gum still attached. But I was happy to get this for like $6. It's a really cool item. It's just very kind of like immediate nostalgia from the era,
yeah, that gum never dies. It's pretty crazy if you open wax from that era.
You can
still
eat
there.
it. You can still eat it.
It still looks, like
it goes really well with circus animal cookies too, which is really strange.
Yeah, you can use your razor to dice up the piece of gum and share amongst your friends.
You could use the razor to get the gum off of the card without
There you
having
go.
staining. I mean, there are a lot of utility uses for the razor in a
I guess so.
in a card. Oh, great, a razor! Just so I don't have to go to Lowe's now and buy a pack of them. I got the one in the card. How cool! You
Perfect.
call the company up, and be like, "Yeah, I got a razor and cards. You guys want me to reimburse you for the razor, or?"
I only paid for the card, so I don't really know what you want me to do.
Yeah, what do I do? Do you want me to? How do I handle this morally? That's a moral dilemma. Ah, gosh, that sort of covers our podcast. Ryan, you want to share anything additional?
I think, man, I can find this video. I'll try and find it, and we can share it on the blog. But there was a video of Michael Eisner, former CEO of Disney,
Yeah.
who's a pretty fanatic collector. At least he was at one point. He actually ate an old piece of gum from the 80s during this TV show interview he did. So I figure if Michael Eisner will do it, anybody should be able to do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any health risk in eating, gum that's any
I don't
age,
think so.
because I can't. Gum is one of those things I've never seen go moldy ever. Any age of gum, any old pack, some pulls of gum, it still looks pink with like a
Yeah.
little dust of sugar on it. Like it still looks the same, And so, I've gnawed on some of the old gum from the 80s in the past, and it starts out just like shattering in your mouth, like throwing a piece of glass against a wall. But then after time, a little bit of time and some like the moisture and things, it starts to break down, and you get, a very stale piece of gum out of it. But you can still chew it for a little while, and there's still flavor. I mean, it's still, after like a couple minutes, it starts to taste like normal gum again.
Yes.
So it's kind of an interesting thing, and you chew on it for a while, and you toss it, and that's, you did it. So, but I can't think of any health hazard. But then again, looking at it from like a business standpoint, it would be my hope that Topps, you thought about all this stuff when they were producing gum. Like, yeah, let's just make it not ever be unedible. How do we do that? Like, how do we make this forever edible, even 100 years from now? So gum is an interesting thing in that way, that I've never seen it deteriorate in quality, which says a lot about it, right? So
Yeah, maybe they should start selling cards in like cans of Spam or some other stuff that just never goes bad.
yeah, you could get cards, and in the card pack is a piece of Spam.
If you think about a Spam can, the dimensions are actually pretty similar to a baseball card.
You could probably
So
squeeze a card in there, like
yeah,
on
I
the
think it's
side.
actually kind of a perfect match. So that'll be my next business venture is
Right.
spam cards.
Yeah, I think about, okay, you'd have to obviously protect the card in like cellophane or something so it's not gunked up with the Spam. Spam's delicious though.
It is.
It's so good. You can fry it up. There's so many uses for Spam. It's such a great multi-use meat. But I think about, because the Spam edges, it's not a square. It's like this rectangle with rounded edges. So you'd have to find a way to get a card in there without bending the corners in any way. I wonder if that's possible. That's interesting to think about. Spam is one of those things you could feasibly last forever. So you could be like, yeah, this is my grandpa's Spam collection. He just liked to buy Spam. So,
Gosh.
you could open it up. It's like from the 50s. You still open it up. It's still exactly like one bought today. Like same exact everything.
Yeah, that would be
Looks the same,
interesting.
smells the same, has the same consistency. Branding hasn't changed.
I'm trying to think of other food products that were associated with cards. Gum is the obvious one. There were the Bell brand potato chips in the 60s
Been a lot
with
of food
cards
releases.
inside the bag of potato chips.
Yeah.
I think they were inside the bag, but I think they were at least protected by some sort of thin.
I think it was like a wax paper. But don't quote me on that. I don't know. I'm just thinking, like, because some of those Bell brand chips, they have oil staining, and if they're in cellophane, they'd be protected from the oil staining at least partially, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know how they were protected though. I really don't. I know there was like Hostess from the 90s. You can get those Hostess cupcakes and get like a baseball card.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then you
Hostess.
can go to Denny's and get the Pinnacle Artist Proofs in the 90s, and in the early 90s you could do that with the Upper Deck with Denny's.
Did Cracker Jack have cards in their products at one
yeah,
point?
man. 91. They did the reproductions of the mini, the original Cracker Jack cards from the early 20th
Yeah.
century. The miniature versions of them.
Um,
There have been a lot of food issues, man, like a ton of them. You might remember back in like 50s, there was that Frank's company produced that set of cards with all those Hall of Famers in it, like Red Schoendienst and Ted Williams and a bunch of guys. Those cards are actually quite rare and valuable. But as you kind of come forward in the decade, there's Post. You could get stuff out of the Post cereal boxes. You might remember those. Cereal was a great place to get cards when I was younger. And there were like batteries, like Duracell did a thing for a while. One year, I think 93. I mean,
Really?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different companies that have produced and try to tie their brand into the hobby over the years. I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I like it. It's fun. It's kind of neat.
Well, Kellogg's had the 3D thing.
Yeah.
Right.
In the 70s.
Yeah.
Late 70s.
Okay, there's a lot now that we
Tons.
think about it.
Tons. Yeah,
Right,
so
I just sent you the YouTube links. Maybe you can throw that in the blog post. But
all
you can
right.
see Michael Eisner with John Travolta eat a piece of 25-year-old gum from what I think was a Topps product from the 80s.
Okay, I'll make sure to link that there. That's interesting. That's Eisner and Travolta. What a strange mix.
I know.
It's kind of funny. I like that. Cool. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Ryan, for bantering with me over the last 42 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you for tuning in to the Radicards podcast and Radicards.com. I'm your host, Patrick Reno, and until next time, enjoy collecting. If you like this content, please subscribe. Thank you. Enjoy collecting.